Ajahn Chah used to come over to visit us at the International Forest Monastery, Wat Nana Chah. And he would go down the line of monks and he would ask the senior monk, "How are you today?" And the monk would say, "I'm fine." And he would say, "That's uncertain." And then he would go to the next monk and say, "How are you today?" And he would say, "I'm so-so." And he'd say, "That's uncertain." Then he'd go to the monk down the end of the line and he'd say, "How are you today?" And he'd say, "I'm really suffering, Ajahn Chah. It's too hot, it's unpleasant, the mosquitoes are too many, I can't eat the food." And he'd say, "That too is uncertain." He would go down the line of 20 monks and it was only 2 or 3 words he would say, "That's uncertain, that's uncertain, that's uncertain." This idea of "this too will change" points to this fundamental realization of the Buddha. The ultimate truth of reality, which doesn't change, is that everything changes. So when you know, not just intellectually, understand completely that everything changes, then you can let go of the world. And then you can see the problems of life as they really are. Don't have to attach to them. When you know that this condition, this experience will change, then you can let go of it. Not attaching to it to be the way you want or not be the way that you want. Allow it to be as it is according to reality. And this ability to point out that everything is uncertain is a theme that would go through his teachings. One monk had had a motorbike accident before he became a monk, and then came to the monastery, and there was lots of sitting and walking meditation, and his knees became inflamed again, and it got so bad that he had to sit on a chair. And it was getting very painful and very difficult for him to do the chanting, to sit cross-legged, to have the meal, because most of that was done on the floor and there were very few chairs in the monastery. And he went to Ajahn Chah and said, "I'm having all this problem, this suffering, because of my knees." And then he said, "It's not meant to be this way." And Ajahn Chah said, "If it's not meant to be this way, it wouldn't be this way." And he realized actually when he actually said that, oh, that's true. This is how it is, not how I want it to be. So he was able to observe and be aware of actually how things are. Not the way we idolize them and think they should be. And this was an important aspect of his style of teaching, to point you back. He wouldn't answer your problems and difficulties for you, but he'd get you to look at your own mind. For example, if he asked, "How are you feeling today?" and you said you're not happy, he'd always ask, "What are you attached to?" Because we know that suffering arises because of attachment. And if there's an attachment there, craving there, tanha there, then suffering will naturally arise. Then he would say, let go of the attachment, because that, as we know in the Buddha's teachings, is the ending of suffering. So that was a very skillful pattern or strategic means that you could take away for dealing with problems and difficulties and suffering within one's life, whether in the present moment or in the future. If there's suffering arising, what am I attached to? When you see the attachment, then that's what you let go of, and the suffering ceases. That is the tool that the Buddha gave us. And Ajahn Chah was just re-emphasizing the truths of the Buddha, making them clearer for us to understand. The Buddha's teachings were already clear and precise and simple, but the thing is, we need to be reminded of them. They're not teachings to be left in books, but they're teachings to be realized here and now. And so another aspect of Ajahn Chah's teachings was that he had an absolute commitment to the ways of the Buddha, the ways of doing things of the Buddha. For example, I remember one time a layperson wanted to offer a Volvo to the monastery, a car, and this was 30 years ago in the northeast of Thailand. At that time there was very, very few cars on the roads, and a Volvo was considered an incredibly expensive car, even to find in Bangkok, let alone in the northeast of Thailand. And this layman wanted to offer it to the Sangha, and particularly wanted to offer it to Ajahn Chah. So Ajahn Chah said to the layman, "I cannot receive this myself. I have to have a meeting of the Sangha first." And so he called a meeting of the Sangha, and he asked many of the monks their opinions. And some people said, well, it may be very useful if someone gets sick and needs to go to hospital. Someone else said, well, maybe it'd be useful if you receive it and you can go and give more teachings at other places, Ajahn Chah. And so people came up with various reasons to accept this expensive and generous offer. And Ajahn Chah listened to all the opinions and views of the community. Some were for and some against. And then he said, you know, what would the Buddha do? The Buddha spread the teachings for 45 years throughout India. He didn't have a car. I would be embarrassed as a disciple of the Buddha to accept this gift. At that, all the monks went silent and said, "We agree with you." And it was those examples that he would put up to the community as a way of pointing us back to our source, to the Buddha, pointing us back to the source of the teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Dhamma Vinaya. The other thing that he'd always point us back was towards respect to the Sangha. Ajahn Chah had immense respect for the Sangha, and that was highlighted many, many times, but one time very clearly when he became sick. Ajahn Chah developed a condition where he had pressure of fluid on the brain, and he had a stroke, and that affected his speech and his mobility. But his mind was absolutely alert, very bright and very clear. I looked after Ajahn Chah when he was in this period of illness, but he was still teaching throughout that time. His body was sick, but his mind wasn't. And the people that would come to him would often see him sick, just in the posters you see outside in the exhibition out the front door, sometimes sitting in a wheelchair. And they would get upset and feel sorry. They'd say, I feel so sorry that a great teacher like this is sick. And I would tell them that the body you see is sick, but that's not Ajahn Chah. If Ajahn Chah was still attached to the body, then he wouldn't be the person we know as Ajahn Chah. And I saw that so many times when he wasn't concerned for the body. And one time he'd had an operation to remove phlegm from his lungs, and you could see that he realized the body was getting close to passing away. And the doctors had to, they wanted to give him a food and medicine through a nasal drip. And he didn't want that. You could see he realized that he'd had enough. This was enough for this body. There was no further reason to stay alive. It's not that he didn't want to or wish to go. There's no cause. And he refused food and medicine at that time. And so the doctors became very concerned. And so all the monks, the senior monks, came in and asked Ajahn Chah, please, could you take the medicine, could you take food, and could you take liquids further to extend your life? And he remained silent. So then the next day we had a meeting of the Sangha, and then we went to Ajahn Chah and we paid respects to him as a community of monks, and said, bowed down to him and said, Ajahn Chah, please, on behalf of the Sangha and all the laity, we request you as a community to take food and drink and extend your life for the well-being and happiness of us all. And it's only when we asked on behalf of the Sangha that he nodded his head and continued to extend his life for another 10 years. And it was because of that asking on behalf of the Sangha, because of his respect for the Sangha. And that, I thought, pointed back to the example in the Buddha's life, where Venerable Ananda's mind was overcome by Mara, and he forgot or didn't ask because he was confused and overcome with sadness that the Buddha was going to pass away. Because there wasn't a cause, then the Buddha could not extend his life out of desire. There has to be a cause. In this particular case, the Buddha, Ajahn Chah would never compare himself to the Buddha, but in this case, the cause had to come from the Sangha, not just his own wish. And it was those examples that set up the standards in our tradition for always respecting the Sangha. And the other aspect of Ajahn Chah's training, once you'd come to him and accepted his training, is that once you became his disciple, then he would teach you to have great patience and endurance. There was a word that's often used in Ajahn Chah's monastery, and it was called Toraman. And Toraman when translated into English, means torture. And Ajahn Chah was an expert in Toraman. But when you say that, it sounds unusual. How can a monk torture his disciples? It's interesting, you never got the feeling that there was any motivation coming from a self behind it, that it was for your own good, that somehow he saw a weakness there and he would make you rise up to the occasion. And I'll give you an example. I was sitting in the Abhosada hall. We were doing the chanting of the 227 rules of the monks, and then the Ajahn Chah gave a Dhamma talk. Normally he'd talk for an hour or two and we'd leave, but this day he talked for 7 hours. Now if I talked for 7 hours to you tonight, then you would get an understanding of the word Toraman. Okay. Especially if you cannot leave this hall. You're not allowed to get up from your seat. After 1 hour it's inspiring. After 2 hours it's getting boring. After 3 hours it's definitely getting on the level of Toraman. And it's very interesting, as he was giving this talk, it was very high Dhamma. And he would then sometimes, I remember after 5 hours, my knees were screaming. And I was looking for a way out, but he couldn't leave. And I remember him looking around, and he looked straight at me and he said, "Are you suffering?" And I thought that was obvious. And then he said, "You have to find a way out of suffering in the mind. Don't run away from the suffering." Because the Buddha's teaching of the First Noble Truth is to understand and know and comprehend and transcend suffering. And so it was by pointing you back, and when he pointed me back to the mind, then you could see that yes, he was actually giving you the opportunity. Because if you were just to sit meditation alone in your hut, you normally don't sit for 7 hours straight. When the pain gets strong in the knees, you want to shift or change. But he was using the peer group pressure of the community of monks sitting there and the pressure of the teacher sitting there. He was sitting without moving through the 7 hours as well. I'm sure his knees ached as well. But he was pointing us and each and every person back. Dukkha needs to be comprehended, investigated and understood and transcended through the understanding, not through running away. And that was a great skill, but also I think his greatest skill was that he didn't lose many disciples as well. Because if it's coming from the wrong place, you cannot do that again. I cannot get my monks at my monastery to sit for 7 hours while I give a talk, because of the paramitas are not there. The Dhamma is not the same. It's just like when the Buddha would give a talk to the monks, he would talk sometimes all through the night on Dhamma, and the monks would be listening, inspired, because of the paramitas of the Buddha, the spiritual qualities the power of his mind, the power of his Dhamma teachings, the clarity of them, the skill in the presentation, and what they were pointing to, his ability to understand and comprehend the audience and the Dhamma, to teach that audience at that particular time. That is a great teacher who can do that. And not everyone can do that. The other quality of Ajahn Chah's in terms of his Dhamma teachings was his teaching of how to let go of suffering. So not just pointing out to endure and be patient through what is difficult and unpleasant, but also to how to let go of things and how to put things down. And one of the monks was telling me that he went with a walk through with Ajahn Chah, and as they were walking through the forest, there was a big branch laying on the path, and Ajahn Chah got him to pick one end of the branch up, and Ajahn Chah picked the other. And as they picked it up, it was very heavy. And Ajahn Chah said, "Is it heavy?" And he said, "Yes." And then they threw it off into the forest and then said, "Now is it heavy?" And he said, "No." And he said, "So too, if your mind lets go of everything, it will be light." So he would say that if you let go of your attachments a little, you obtain a little peace. If you let go of your attachments a lot, you experience a lot of peace. If you let go of your attachments completely, you experience complete peace. And I want to maybe give you an example of his ability to teach, and this was a personal example. The first year after I became a monk in 1980, I spent the rains retreat with Ajahn Chah, and he had 70 monks staying in the monastery, and about 50 nuns, and many lay people coming in huge numbers to see him. And one day I went on alms round, and on the way back I was walking back with another monk who was again newly ordained. And on the way back, this monk started to find fault with the other monks in the monastery. This monk wasn't doing what he liked, and this monk didn't say what he wanted, and he was complaining. And I remember thinking, I didn't want to hear complaints about other good monks. And so I walked off ahead. But I kept on thinking, he shouldn't complain about other good monks. Why is he complaining about other good monks? And I started complaining about him. And as I was thinking, he shouldn't do that, he shouldn't think that, I walked into the monastery and I had my head down thinking and carrying on this conversation that had ended 10 minutes ago. And then I heard someone say in clear English, "Good morning." And I looked up, and Ajahn Chah was standing a metre away from me with a big radiant smile on his face. And it was the first time I'd ever heard him speak English. It was he could only speak 2 phrases of English. The first one was "good morning," and the other one was, "Do you want a cup of tea?" Because he went to England twice, and everyone was always asking him, "Do you want a cup of tea?" And he said it's very easy to remember because it's like in the Pali chanting when the monks give the blessing, "Upakapati." Do you want a cup of tea? And so he always remembered that. And so this was his chance to practice his English on me. He said, "Good morning." And I remember putting my hands in Anjali and smiling and responding, "Good morning Ajahn Chah, good morning Luang Por." We called him Venerable Father. "Good morning Luang Por, Venerable Father." And he smiled, and of course my mood changed. I'd completely forgotten what this monk had said. Went back, we had the meal. That day I did sitting and walking meditation at my hut, and in the evening I decided to go and visit him because I had learnt as a layman shiatsu, how to do pressure massage, and every now and then I would go to his hut and give him a foot massage, and he found that that was useful. So this day I decided, Ajahn Chah had said good morning to me, I'd go over and give him a foot massage. I went to his hut, and at that time there was about 10 or 15 monks sitting, talking on Dhamma to him and listening to him explain aspects of Dhamma. And he was sitting on a chair like this, a bamboo chair. And so I sat down in front of him on the floor, and he had his legs down, and I started massaging his feet, and he was chatting to the monks. And then they rang the bell. It was time for evening chanting, and the hall for the evening chanting was very close to his hut. And he told all the monks to leave and go off to do evening chanting. And he said, "Tanyana, you stay here." It was the first time I'd been alone with him. There were so many people usually around him. And we didn't have any candles lit, it was dark, but the moon was coming up, and it was one of those beautiful nights when temperature was just right. There was no mosquitoes around, and I was sitting with Ajahn Chah, and he just sat meditation, and I was massaging his feet, and then the monks started chanting, 70 monks, and I felt it was like in the heaven realms. There was listening monks chanting the praise of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and here you are repaying the debt of gratitude you owe to the teacher that the Buddha said you should do. And he was sitting there peacefully, and it was my chance to make a lot of merit. And just as I felt like my mind was in the heaven realms, he kicked me in the chest, and I fell backwards and hit my head. And then he pointed at me and said, "See? One monk says something you don't like, and then another monk says good morning, and you're delighted all day. Do not get lost in the words of others. Watch your own mind." And then he gave me a Dhamma talk about not delighting in or getting lost in the words of others, whether it's praise or blame, whether we like it or don't. As he would say, if we like it, that's good. If we don't like it, that's good. If it's good, that's good. If it's bad, that's good. And that, I was taken back, and I sat with my hands in Anjali's. He gave a very long talk to me. But the thing that impressed me the most was that he knew me better than I knew myself. And also I was moved by his compassion, that I felt very much the compassion of, like the Buddha. We read in the suttas that in the morning the Buddha would sit meditation and use his knowledges and psychic powers to pervade the world and see, who shall I help today? Out of compassion. And then he would go and teach Angulimala, for example, and help him out of compassion, relieving him from his suffering. I felt very much that of all the monks in the monastery, Ajahn Chah had decided he saw me walking in the monastery with my head down, thinking about what this monk said, and realized he's in hell. So he said good morning to take me up to heaven. But he realized you cannot teach somebody in heaven. You have to kick them down to the earth. And then when they're on the earth, then you can teach them not to get lost in the words of another. And he also knew that this monk is very stubborn. If he had just told me everything is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self, I would have forgotten that years ago. But because he kicked me, I always remember that. And I can offer that as a teaching to you. This is not just me he's kicked. Remember that yourself. When people praise you, or blame you, or people say things that you agree with or disagree with, like or dislike, do not get lost in the words of others. Maintain your mindfulness and awareness of yourself. And so I'd like to give this as an example of Ajahn Chah pointing out for us to develop self-awareness and abandon our suffering. And when we do that, then we're coming back to the core teachings of the Buddha. And so today, on this special occasion, we have gathered here, and I'm so delighted to see so many people, so many good bhikkhus and good nuns and lay people who, some of you have heard of Ajahn Chah, some of you have not, are recognizing somebody who doesn't want to be recognized for himself. Ajahn Chah never wanted a personality cult around him. He always wanted us to look to the Buddha Dhamma and to look to the teachings of the Buddha as a way of liberation. To always focus on those fundamental teachings of the Buddha and to apply them and practice them in our own lives, and then we can find the freedom of suffering. So I'd like to end the talk this evening on this point.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.